So, as we all know, Anthony Joshua is set to take on Jermaine Franklin on the 1st of April. At the time of recording this video, the press conference was yesterday. It was fairly dry, which is to be expected really. There's never any drama or thrills and spills in the lead up to Joshua's fights. So, yeah, a dry press conference, probably to be expected. However, this morning I watched two interviews, both IFL interviews, which I'll link in the description box. One is with Anthony Joshua and the other is with Derek James. And some interesting things were said. Interesting enough for me to want to make a video on them. And it's the kind of stuff that leads me to ask the question, is Anthony Joshua going through a mindset shift? And so I've got some notes, so I'll read through them and yeah, see what you think. The first thing that I'm going to touch on, which may seem a little bit trivial, but I know Hatman definitely picked up on it in his review of the press conference, and that is AJ and how he answers questions. Because yesterday, at the press conference and in the interview that I watched, he was answering questions in a very straightforward, very direct fashion, which is unlike him. Because if you've seen his interviews in his any kind of media recent years, AJ has this weird way of articulating himself where he can be asked a very simple question, but he'll kind of go all around the back of the houses to answer it, and he'll overthink his answer, and it comes out just like a bit of a jumbled, unrelated mess sometimes, where he talks a lot, but he doesn't say very much because it's a very simple question, but you give this long-winded answer and he doesn't really actually answer it at all when you break it down. Whereas now he's just answering, he's not overthinking his answers, he's kind of just putting it out there, take it or leave it. I'm not going to cater my answer to your expectations. He's just more direct, as I say. And I feel like this could potentially represent him being a bit more focused, this more direct nature, because he has actually spoken recently about some distractions outside the ring which have prevented him from fully devoting himself. And yeah, AJ is a brand ambassador for a lot of companies, probably got a lot of responsibilities for his sponsors, but there may also be personal issues. AJ is quite a private person, so he doesn't divulge that much, but he's made it clear that for a while he hasn't been able to fully devote himself to fighting, which is never a good sign. You know, boxing really is a sport where you have to be in it. If you're not in it 100%, call it a day, because it's not the place for you. And there was one point where he reiterated, because Kugan Cassius spoke about Anthony Joshua is linking up with Derek James and he's doing what's best for him. He's making the choices that are best for him in his career. And AJ really made a point of agreeing with Kugan. And he went on to talk about how the link that he had with Robert Garcia, it was almost prompted by Angel Garcia. He said that Angel presented him with a short list of trainers and was quite keen to get Robert Garcia in. Joshua said he agreed with that. You know, he rates Robert Garcia as a coach, but it did seem like that was a choice that was driven by Angel, whereas Joshua kind of categorically stated now that he made the decision to go to Texas to work with Derek James. So yeah, it seems like AJ's taken a bit more responsibility, and he's like, you know what, I'm going to make the choices that are best for me and my career. And this also leads on to something else, where when Kugan asked him about, okay, you're with Derek James now, why did you pick Derek James? What do you think he's going to add to you? And Joshua said he spoke about not putting pressure on Derek James as a trainer, kind of going on to talk about how whatever happens in Joshua's career, whether it's good or bad, it's on him, it's down to him. And now this would ostensibly kind of indicate that Joshua's taken responsibility for what happens from here on in, because recently, whether it's been unintentional or intentional, Joshua's kind of passed the buck a little bit, at least surrounding the Usyk fights, because especially the first Usyk fight, Joshua, after he'd lost that fight, he was talking about how he just follows the instructions of his corner, almost as if, they just program him. So when it doesn't go wrong, it's just like, oh, my coaches didn't tell me the right thing to do, and I lost. And that didn't sit right with me, because as a fighter, yeah, you have a corner that get you ready in the lead up to a fight, and they help you as best they can in between the rounds. But they are just that. They're your corner. They're the trainers. You are the fighter. You're the one in the fight, and you have to fight the fight to win. And so you need to be able to, first and foremost, yourself assess the situation you're in. What do I have to do? What shouldn't I do? When's time to go for it? What do I need to do to win this fight? You're the participant. You have to do it. Your training team, your coaches, they're on the outside. They're a second pair of eyes looking from a different angle to help give you a little tip here and there in the 1 minute break. Give you some intel on things you may have missed out on. That kind of stuff. And if you look at great fighters of the past, they've typically done that. Even when they've had legendary coaches and trainers in their corners, they're fighters who are able to adapt as they go along. They're able to think on the fly. They have a bit more awareness of where they are in the fight, what they need to do to get into a better position in the fight, that kind of thing. Tyson Fury is someone who does that very well, and he has a great relationship with a great trainer in Sugar Hill Stewart, but Tyson Fury can think on the fly. He knows how to adapt. He knows what he has to do and when he has to do it. He's just kind of given a little boost by Sugar Hill Stewart. Whereas AJ, I don't know, the way he was carry on is like, I'm just AJ Bot 3000. You just have to enter the right instructions and I carry it out. And it was all very robotic, and it was just, as I say, whether it was intentional or unintentional, AJ was kind of passing the buck into the training team, where Rob McCracken didn't give me the right instructions. Oh, it was whatever, stuff like that. Whereas now, Joshua talks about Derek James and says that he's a bit more of a taskmaster, and it's a spit and sawdust environment. And if we go back to the fact that AJ said that he made the decision, he's decided to relocate himself to Derek James's gym, where it's going to probably be tougher than the English Institute of Sport in Sheffield, where Joshua was based for many years. He's gone from the national training ground for a lot of the international amateurs in the UK to like a proper professional gym, which is full of winners right now, and that's something we're going to touch on. So yeah, Joshua seems to have made a conscious decision off his own back, to relocate to this environment. And that's something that many people have said Joshua needs. Because when he was up in Sheffield training with those, he wasn't training with them, he was training alongside them. It's probably a better way to describe it, alongside those amateur fighters. He was very much the big fish in that pond. And I'm sure he was a massive inspiration to the younger amateurs who were getting ready for Olympic Games and international tournaments, because we've got our very own unified heavyweight champion training here, and he's bringing in lots of money, lots of cameras, so we get a little bit of exposure to him. We see what goes into being a high-level professional fighter. But for Joshua himself, where he was that big fish and essentially leading the pack, there was no one for him to really look up to. So maybe he lost some of that edge. Maybe he plateaued a little bit because he didn't have a target to strive for, because no one in his camp was ahead of him. Whereas now, working with Derek James, he's going to be rubbing shoulders with Errol Spence and Jamel Charlo and Frank Martin. And Derek James actually revealed that when Joshua arrived in Texas, Errol Spence was actually sparring, and he believes that being surrounded by these guys who I mentioned is a good thing. And I 100% agree, because if you look at Errol Spence and Jamel Charlo, they're two guys with a lot of intensity. And I use those two because I'm not so familiar with Frank Martin. I understand he's burst onto the scene. Is he a WBA regular champion or is he a full champion? I can't remember, forgive me. But nevertheless, even Frank Martin is really starting to, he wants to get his name out there. He wants to start to carve out a career. You have to imagine that he's hungry. He wants to get stuck in. So he's got some ambition. So there's Frank Martin. You got Errol Spence, who's unified welterweight champion, seen as by many as #1 in his division, and is a very good fighter. Jermell Charlo, undisputed light middleweight champion. So he has proven himself to be the best. Hey, he might still lose, but for all intents and purposes, right now he's the best because he's got all the belts. And especially with Spence and Charlo, they're two guys who have a lot of intensity. Spence is a bit more of a laid-back character. You know, he's not someone who you're going to really see hyping up and losing his rag. He's quite laid back. He's quite cool and calm and collected. But in the ring, where it counts, a lot of intensity. Errol Spence is on you, and he will not let off until he's broken you down. We've seen that time and time again in Spence's career. And even if you look at the Ugas fight, where Spence seemed to have a little bit of a mini episode, clearly, in my opinion, still dealing with the trauma of that car crash, which is understandable because that was horrific, that car crash. He got caught by Ugas. I don't know whether he had a flashback or he just had a moment where he was like, I don't know where I am right now. But even though he had that, he very quickly regrouped and got back to beating Ugas like a drum. Like you would have thought that Ugas had stolen something from Spence, the way Spence beat him. That is ferocity. That is intensity. No room to breathe. He's going to be on you. And Jermell Charlo is the same. Jermell Charlo is relative to Spence. He's a bit more volatile outside the ring. I think he's a bit more of an emotional, energetic character. But he is another guy with a lot of intensity in the ring as well when it counts. If you look at that first fight he had with Brian Castano, he was having a lot of success early, but then he got caught himself. But you didn't see Jermell Charlo fold. He's the kind of fighter where you hurt him and he's still dangerous because he's going to get stuck in. So being around these kind of characters would probably be good for Anthony Joshua because he's someone who, his intensity's been a little bit neutralized over the years. He's maybe been a bit too squeaky clean, forgetting he's a fighter almost and living the athlete lifestyle. But you have to be a fighter. You have to be a Spartan. You're a warrior at the end of the day. Yeah, it's prize fighting. And, you know, you have these big promotions and the music and the fans come out. But it's the modern day gladiators. You have to be a warrior. You have to be willing to be stuck in, get stuck in and be as intense and as ferocious as you can until you get the job done and really learn to pull the trigger. And so I 100% agree. I think it'll be very good for Anthony Joshua. And one thing that I also agree with what Derek James says, and it's kind of interesting he says this, is he wants Joshua to be more present in the ring. And this really rang true for me because, as I said earlier, Joshua does seem to have a bit of a natural inclination to be an overthinker. And if you consider what Joshua's gone through in his career, he's had some rough moments. Probably the roughest moment of his career was when he suffered his first loss to Andy Ruiz, because that was really a disaster. It was such a humiliating loss to be beaten up in the way that he was and stopped. But you have to look at that fight, and when you see in the early rounds the amount of success that Joshua had, because he was getting off all kinds of offense on Andy Ruiz and having a lot of success, landing clean, powerful punches. And Ruiz got really good chin, so, you know, credit to him for taking those punches. But the first 2 rounds, you saw Joshua doing a good job of outboxing Ruiz. In the third round, landed some real clean offense on him, clean enough to knock him down. But we saw Joshua get greedy. He made a mistake. He misjudged how hurt Ruiz actually was, and he paid the price. Ruiz capitalized, and as I say, it was a disaster. And so if you're already, and this is just my interpretation, of course, but if you're already an overthinker like AJ is, and you suffer a loss like that where you're on top and you make a mistake and it goes wrong big time, that's only going to kind of compound your nature of being an overthinker. And then you start to understand how it's going to be an easy trap for AJ to fall into, where he's overthinking in fights. And he's so caught up in his thoughts that he's not actually doing stuff physically, and he's being outworked, and he's maybe even being beaten up at points. And of course, you see that quite a bit in the Alexander Usyk fight. But Alexander Usyk is a fantastic fighter with amazing technique, great active guard. So there's a lot of moving parts: the head, the hands, the feet, in and out. There's a lot you have to focus on, and Alexander Usyk, his IQ, the way he processes information so quickly. If you're not fighting at a quick pace yourself, he will leave you behind, and that's going to be a massive deficit you have to make up. But then when you factor in that, okay, his confidence is not really there. He's taken a big hit recently, and he's already a natural overthinker. You can start to see how he'll just get locked up in his actions. He'll be frozen because he's constantly thinking, what's happening? What's happening? What do I do? What do I do? Panic mode. So hearing these things, it's music to my ears, because it's stuff that really rings true. You know, Joshua needs to be more present in the fight. Remember, it's a fight, and you need to fight in the fight to win. You can't win by thinking. Certainly you have to apply some intelligence, but you can't be stuck in your own head. You have to be in the moment. You have to go with the flow, and ultimately you have to get the job done. So Derek James, I think he's assessed that very well, and I certainly agree that being surrounded by Spence, Charlo, and Martin, it's going to be a tougher environment. And if AJ can hang in that environment, he'll probably do a good job of instilling more confidence in him, because let's be real, his confidence is it's not in a good place right now. So as I say, I like what I hear. Joshua seems to be going for a bit of a mindset shift, taking a bit more responsibility and a bit more onus, while also adjusting his perception of what is expected of him and of his trainer, kind of linking back to the responsibility. But then Derek James also showing that he's got a good eye for things, and I feel like he's going to prescribe the right things for Anthony Joshua. So it's going to be interesting to see how this goes forward, and what the results will be. We do have to wait until April 1st, because of course talk is cheap. You know, the proof is in the pudding, and that won't be until April when we get to see the goods. Some people will still say that Jermaine Franklin's a bit of an easy touch, so we may not learn that much, and I agree. I don't really see Jermaine Franklin as the easiest touch, although I do expect Joshua to win. But still, I'm going to be keeping an eye on this one to see what changes there are. Of course, physical changes in Joshua's style and how he approaches the fight, but also whether this attitude is maintained going forward, because I definitely agree with a lot of the things that have been said. However, that's just my opinion, just my musings on this. Check out the interviews if you haven't done so already, linked in the description box, as I say. And in the comment section, if you feel like do you agree with what I've said? Do you disagree? Do you think I've missed anything out? Leave it down there and I'll get back to you. But for now, people, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you on the next video.